For the past 24 hours, Gazans have been prevented to reach the north of the Strip, the Netzarim corridor, because Israel says Hamas breached the terms of a hostage-prisoner exchange by failing to release civilian hostages before military hostages. In fact, yesterday, Daniel Hagari from the IDF said they were fearful of the fate of 29-year-old Arbel Yahoud, who is supposed to be, he said, released in that first batch in those first 2 weeks, and wouldn't allow, as a result, Palestinians to return home to the north during this continued ceasefire until, he said, the situation is resolved. Well, just in the past hour or so, two Palestinian sources have told AFP news agency, Agence France Presse, that the Israeli woman, Arbel Yahoud, 29 years old, will be released separately to the handover next Saturday. That's coming from Islamic Jihad sources, which is believed to hold Arbel still. The dates they're talking about is now Friday. So we'll see what happens to the Netzarim corridor in the next few hours as a result. But that coming in a short while ago. I want to bring in Milena Ansari, Israel and Palestine Assistant Researcher for Human Rights Watch, who's in Jerusalem right now. Milena, great to talk to you. There's a lot to talk about. Can I just first ask the developments today and whether Human Rights Watch, whether you have a take on the comments from Donald Trump, the idea of moving 1.5 million Palestinians to Egypt or Jordan?
Not to comment directly on Donald Trump's responses or comments, but just to really flag that even in November 2024, Human Rights Watch released a big report on war crimes and crimes against humanity of forced displacement, where Israeli forces were evacuating Palestinians unlawfully to areas where they were not safe, and there were no proper evacuation procedures in place, risking their lives. So we've already documented and concluded war crimes and multiple crimes against humanity of forced displacement. We've also concluded ethnic cleansing in areas where including the buffer zones between Gaza and southern Israel and the Netzarim corridor and Philadelphia corridor, where there's no intention, what it seems like, for Israeli forces to return Palestinians to these areas. And this is a form of ethnic cleansing. So when we talk about solutions or examples like this that call for the displacement of Palestinians, and we're talking about 2 million Palestinians being displaced, that is, in a way, calls for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But again, the emphasis here is after 15 months, after 16 months, I think governments and states should understand that human beings are not bargaining chips. So what I mean by this, for hostages, civilian hostages illegally held in the Gaza Strip by Palestinian armed groups, this doesn't give the justification to Israeli authorities to really not allow Palestinians to return to their homes, to not allow the opening of the Rafah crossing and all crossings, to allow unfettered and flow of humanitarian aid coming into the Gaza Strip. For 15 months, we've seen people die from starvation, malnutrition, dehydration, even the cold weather. 7 babies were killed from the cold. And now we're discussing whether to open borders and how much flow of aid should be coming in. I think it's enough is enough, where human beings are not bargaining chips, and we do really need to upscale the humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip.
You talk about, Milena, the human rights abuses you've documented along the Netzarim corridor and other parts during the past 12 months or more. Just let me ask you, what happens to that information in terms of trying to bring about international justice? If we look at the moment, we have a case at the International Court of Justice brought by South Africa. There was an interim ruling from the ICJ to say that there's a plausible case that South Africa has to bring this. They've been bringing forward thousands of documents, and I think Israel has until July this year to submit its response to that. So does some of your information, has it gone to that case, or does it go to the ICC, for example, in the case of the arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu for human rights abuses? What happens to the information?
So the reports, importantly, we advocate for change. We advocate with government officials. We advocate also with international NGOs and humanitarian organizations. And of course, our reports do end up in the references or information provided to, for example, South Africa and the ICJ, but directly to governments in general who do want to intervene. It does end up at the ICC prosecutor's desk at some point to also understand that there has been, legal analysis to what we're seeing from factual information on the ground. With regards to provisional measures that the International Court of Justice issued and ordered Israel to implement in South Africa's genocide case, we have also concluded that Israel has also violated some of these provisional measures with regards to the humanitarian aid coming in and access to the Gaza Strip. But at the end of the day, as much as people are aware of the reality that's happening on the ground, I mean, we're seeing mass atrocities for the past 15 months online, on social media. They're available for everyone to see. The barrier here is political will, unfortunately, and double standards. So when we even push for the importance of states to support international independent mechanisms like the ICC and ICJ, unfortunately, we do see states implementing double standards with saying ICC arrest warrants against Israeli officials will not be respected or will not be executed. However, arrest warrants against Putin, for example, or Hamas leaders, that will go ahead. This is clear, double standards with this regard. And in order to end the cycle of violence in Israel and Palestine, because the cycle of violence hasn't started for 15 months, it's been years and decades of, systematic repression, systematic oppression of Palestinians, and as well as violations of Israeli rights.
Yeah.
So this cycle of violence needs to end by really addressing root causes, addressing Israel's apartheid and persecution against Palestinians, and many others. The situation in the West Bank, for example.
Yes.
The ceasefire was announced in the Gaza Strip, but immediately after, we're seeing surge of settler attacks across the West Bank, burning homes, cars, injuring Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank. So we're seeing military operations by Israeli forces in Jenin refugee camp, where there's collective punishment on the community, destruction of infrastructure. So really, the ceasefire would stop the aerial bombardment, the ground operations, but it by no means stops the cycle of violence in this region.
Yes, we were talking yesterday to Mustafa Barghouti, the Palestinian politician, physician, who was explaining some of the scenario that he was witnessing, he said, in the occupied West Bank. Israel, for its part, saying that it was dealing with threats to Israelis who'd been killed in previous weeks. And I should also say Israel on the ICJ claim this case is ridiculous. Nevertheless, it is ongoing right now. I should also ask you about the Netzarim corridor in the past 24 hours, because you talked about human rights abuses that you'd seen in the past. How are your teams documenting what's going on? Because we can't be there as international journalists. We're not allowed in. We heard about one man being killed there as people tried to get to the north. Israel saying that these are warning shots of people trying to get past when they are not able to do so. Do you have any information or an assessment of what's going on there at the moment?
I'll just really flag an important point you talked about is access to the Gaza Strip. And according to the provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, Israel is ordered to allow humanitarian actors to come in. It should allow journalists also to even come in. Human Rights Watch has repeatedly asked for access on the ground to Gaza, but we've been denied by the Israeli forces to go into the Gaza Strip. But we have been speaking to people on the ground. It's basically people who have been able to go back home are either who are already in northern Gaza and are going within northern Gaza, or people who are already in the middle and southern area of Gaza who are able to move around. But there has been no Palestinians displaced from northern Gaza able, for example, to go from southern Gaza to cross Netzarim corridor. According to the ceasefire information, we know that within a week of the ceasefire announcement, which already passed yesterday, Netzarim corridor would be open for Palestinians to go back to their homes to the north or south, vice versa. But again, I go back to the point of human beings are not bargaining chips. Israeli authorities are alleging that Hamas violated the ceasefire agreement
Yeah.
with the release of the Israeli soldiers. So now they're not allowing people to cross Netzarim corridor. And, this is a major problem because people, even who we spoke to, who went back to their homes, have not been able to live a normal life inside their homes. There's no access to water in these homes. There's no proper water and sanitation infrastructure connected to these homes. They tell us we can clean the home, we can live in a destroyed home, but we don't have access to water. Even using the bathroom or toilets, they're
Yes.
unable to do so.
Milena, the very basics for living and life. Thank you for your time. Thank you for talking to us. Milena Ansari, Israel and Palestine Assistant Researcher for Human Rights Watch.